everyone, and welcome to the New Earth Lawyer podcast. This is a podcast where we feature lawyers who are changing the practice of law to change the world. My name is Geraldine Johns-Putra, and I'm a lawyer based in Melbourne, Australia. Today we are going to speak to Amanda Lamond, who is based in Cape Town, South Africa. Amanda is a former lawyer, but now she is much more. She is a legal futurist, a soul coach for lawyers, and a spiritual channel. Her name, Amanda Lamond, means beloved Lawspeaker. After working as a law lecturer, a director of a not-for-profit college for impoverished students, a facilitator of corporate leadership programs, an organizational development consultant, and an entrepreneur running events for women lawyers, she says she finally started listening to spiritual guidance that said she is here to work with awakening lawyers. She now coaches and teaches awakening lawyers and writes and speaks about how we can give birth to the new legal system that humanity is crying out for. Amanda, welcome. Thank you for being here. I can't wait to get into our conversation.
Well, thank you for having me. I also can't wait. We've chatted a little bit just for the last few minutes, and I feel like I'm just rearing to go and continue that conversation.
Well, let's start with the other things that you do, because we started talking about all of these other things, not just a lawyer was what I said, but start where you like.
So I find it very difficult, well, I have for a while, this conversation which you used to get at dinner parties. I say used to because who goes to dinner parties anymore during this strange period of COVID times? But this thing of, well, what do you do? And that even my kid, he's 5 and he says, well, Mum, like, what do you do? And how do I explain this to people? And obviously saying that I'm a lawyer is a simple answer, but I feel like that's just not at all true, because the truth is that I don't practice law anymore. So I have over the last couple of years come up with some terms, because of course on LinkedIn you need to put something under the title of what it is you do. So I describe myself now, I say I'm a legal futurist, a soul coach for lawyers, and a spiritual channel. So if we start with the first bit, the legal futurist.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this period that we're living in, where I describe it as having front row seats to the demise of our current civilization. So it's quite a scary time, I think, to be alive, but it's also very exciting. It's full of possibilities. But none of us quite know if we're going to change things in time. So when I talk about the collapse of all the systems, I mean the monetary system, because we're moving towards cryptocurrencies and moving away from cash. And I believe in not so long, cash is going to be like a very outdated way of dealing with things. It will still exist for a while, but it is going to be phased out. And then when we look at the education system and that collapse of how it was a model developed during the Industrial Revolution, and it's simply no longer fit for purpose. It's not training people for the world that we're in now. And that's both at a primary level and also, right through tertiary education. And then the medical system is also collapsing. I'm fascinated now with the treatment of COVID is all based on fighting disease instead of the maintenance of health. So all of our systems are very much, we're fighting things, but that means we're focusing on the very thing we're trying to prevent. People have spoken about the war on drugs. We're fighting the thing we're trying to avoid. So the people who are dying of COVID tend to be, by and large, those with comorbidities, but we're not talking about why people have, obesity and diabetes and all of these things. And then people are starting this conversation around how race so often plays a role, and poverty in these pre-existing conditions, which are then tied to the numbers of people dying from COVID. So that system is on its way down. The food system is so broken. I mean, the more I've learned about food and health, and I walk into a grocery store and I just look at what's lining the aisles, and I think like most of this food is toxic. Yeah. It is filled with preservatives, which make shelf life and whatever, but this is not what is good for my body. And so, of course, I'm trying to eat local and change, how I do all those things. But it's a shift to not going to the supermarket and filling your trolley and freezer. So the same change and systemic collapse we're seeing in law, where I think it's Susan Dykhoff, Professor Susan Dykhoff, who I quote often, who wrote Lawyer, Know Thyself. She's gone back into practice. She was an academic for years, extraordinary woman, mathematician, so degree in maths and law and psychology, a real sort of Da Vinci. And she speaks about the tripartite crisis in the law, which I simplified by saying that lawyers are not liked, lawyers don't like each other, and lawyers don't like themselves. So she explains it a lot more eloquently than that, but she talks about the poor public perception of lawyers, high levels of incivility and aggression amongst lawyers, which I hear that often.
Yep.
And then this very like low levels of satisfaction, high levels of substance abuse, depression, alcoholism, all of these things. So we're looking at the collapse of our legal system. And I explained to the law students that I would say the legal system is about 20 years behind the medical system in terms of our evolution. If you look at the medical model, these days it's quite common that if somebody has a serious disease or a diagnosis of something like cancer, that they will explore alternative options alongside mainstream, medical. It's not strange for people to have like Reiki practitioners on their phone or acupuncturists. Whereas 20 years ago, if you spoke about, acupuncture, people would be like, that's really, that was quite out there. Even in the 80s, 90s. Whereas now that's being accepted, that we have to look at things from all sides. And law, when I talk about, holistic law, which is the term that also one of them is being used, Susan Dykhoff used to talk about comprehensive law. And now we kind of are tending towards the term integrative law. Again, they're just terms, but we're talking about the same thing. To me, it's this awakening within the profession. And those who are part of this integrative law movement is this realization that they just weren't meeting people's actual needs. And the lawyers got frustrated because they'd see the clients presenting with the same or similar problems. And so it was frustrating to them. And they realized they needed to get deeper into what was causing the conflict. So I now regard conflict as it contains the most enormous potential for personal change. And I believe that conflict is here to teach us things. So it's not just random that we have found ourselves, like the neighbors suing you over what, or your business partner. It's not random. These things are absolutely, intentional in terms of the flow of our lives and the bigger waves of force that are at play and our own personal evolution. And so I strongly encourage lawyers just to start viewing the transformative power of conflict, and then their role shifts to being a guide helping people through the conflict. And sometimes not only how do you resolve that conflict, but how do you understand the things that gave rise to it? Because when those are healed, you're not going to find yourself in a similar situation with another business partner or neighbor or whatever, because these things tend to happen in patterns. So there's the unhealed trauma.
I wanted to ask you about the lawyers whom you're mentoring or are in the mentoring program that you've started. What's the development been like over the last few years? What are you seeing in these young lawyers coming through?
So one of my big frustrations has been figuring out how to change systems, how to bring about change. So for a while I was working with law firms, and I ran a woman lawyer network. But I found myself in this uncomfortable situation of trying to get funding from law firms who didn't quite buy into the vision. And then I really knew that there was this need to do work at university level. But the universities, a lot of them just aren't ready. So there are universities all around the world who are starting to offer more integrative law programs, but it's still a very small percentage. And so obviously in terms of now everything's gone online, but until fairly recently in this country, in South Africa, things were, face to face. So I spoke to some of the bigger universities here, and while there's interest, and I, did meetings and proposals and whatever, the buy-in just wasn't there. The will to make it happen, like, let's include this in the curriculum, it's important. I'm very open now about the spiritual work, and we'll touch on that later, the fact that I'm a channel. Absolutely. But when I pitched to universities, I didn't want to complicate things, and so I talk about leadership training for lawyers. And I think something that you said earlier refers to that we confer a lot of power on lawyers. When you get a law degree, you have power.
Yeah.
And I feel that it is immoral, even illegal, to give people that sort of power and yet not teach them how to use it wisely.
Yeah,
so
I
no
think I couldn't have
personal
said it better.
exploration.
Yeah.
Like, who are you? What are you planning to do with this law degree? How are you going to make the world a better place? I love the idea of the MBA pledge that a whole lot of students have come up with, which is a it's a voluntary pledge saying that I will use my MBA for good. I'm not just using it to try and make as much money as possible. And I have long held this vision. So if anyone's listening and has the energy to do this, please do. But to have this vision of law students taking a similar pledge saying, I am going to use my law degree for good. I have studied law because I want to make the world a better place. I went to some universities, did these things, and they're all like, yes, this sounds great, but then crickets, nothing. So my career's felt a lot like that. I'm told that I'm ahead of my time. I go and pitch these ideas and then, hear crickets. And so it's been quite frustrating in that sense, which is why I've shifted now to working with individuals. I've realized that there are many, many individuals who are ready to shift and change, and I could do this work also in groups, but that trying to change organizations and institutions is not where my expertise lies. And it's just frustrating because they're not really on board. So I've shifted the way that I work to being primarily with individuals who are ready to change their lives.
Yeah.
So with the student thing, I was very fortunate last year. So I'm not still doing that thing, but there was an organization within the University of Cape Town running a mentorship program, and I was tasked with running it. And then because of the COVID period, I took it online. And the mentorship thing, the students were paired with magistrates, and fortunately the courts did open up and students were able to go and observe the thing. But the online portion of the program, I started introducing them to integrative law and a whole different way of thinking about the law. And the reaction was extraordinary. The messages, we had a Facebook group that started pouring in just saying, this has changed my life. I had no idea that this was out there. This is the type of lawyer I want to be. What more can I read? And just like, thank you. And then I did a lot of well-being stuff, because the levels of anxiety, stress, and depression are generally very high in law school, and we see that with the statistics that are being released. None of them in South Africa, by the way, but these are US statistics. But of course, last year, with people losing family members and all learning online, and it was radical. And so I did a lot of this well-being stuff. And again, just the reaction from students saying, thank you. I mean, I had letters from students saying, you may not know, but I was actually suicidal, and it was your messages that kept me going. So I was immensely touched and had the sense that this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah.
And the other thing that then changed is realizing, because of technology, I'm not going to wait. So that program is, it had funding for 3 years and it's finished. So unfortunately, it couldn't continue. It is in a different way, shape, form this year, but I'm not involved. But earlier this year, doing some other coaching program, and one of the questions that I was journaling on is, if you could do anything right now and you knew it could not fail, which I've seen this in various forms. If you could do anything right now and you knew it would not fail, what would you love to be doing? And I realized I want to run another mentorship program. And this time I wanted to be fully based on awakening lawyers. And last year I sort of slipped it in. It wasn't the aim of that program. I did co-opt it, I will be honest, a little bit for my own means, because I'm so interested in opening hearts and opening minds. Not everybody appreciated that in last year's program, but anyway, the powers that be when I co-opted it. But the students certainly did. So I had this vision, and now we're in our third week or so of having launched the Awakening Lawyers Student Mentorship Program. So we have 28 South African students, and we have 28 lawyers from all around the world. And I think that's about 9 different time zones. I hadn't realized how challenging that was going to be, having our mentors from all over the world. So we've got South African. I don't have more North African. I mean, it's 28 and it was my first time at doing this. And then we've got Europe and Britain and Canada and North America, one from South America and Australia. I don't have anyone from Asia at the moment on this particular program. But it was amazing in a very short space of time. I mean, literally in like 3 weeks, I just had this vision, and that's how I give birth to things. I get a very clear vision, and then I just have to have absolute faith that it is going to happen, and trust that other people will see and get that vision and come along with me. And that's what's happened. So the lawyers who signed up are amazing. I mean, we were having conversations where we were weeping on the phone together, and they have described it as a homecoming. And that was an unexpected thing for me. I hadn't realized, this was about mentoring the students. And now, Geraldine, what I can tell you is I know this group of mentors who've been gathered is for something so much bigger than just this program.
Ah, yes.
I can sense it.
Yes.
I can feel it.
Well, this really segues nicely into talking about the other work that you do, because what you're describing about how you give birth to things and you just know you have to do it and off you go and do it. You are helping people to do that as well. You're coaching people into finding their purpose. Could you tell us about that?
So I started using the word soul coach for lawyers because there are a lot of lawyer coaches out there. One of the things that I noticed on LinkedIn, I think it's all based on algorithms now. So obviously I know a few, and now posts pop up all the time. It feels like every second person on my LinkedIn profile is a lawyer coach. I'm sure that in terms of world percentages of people doing this job, it can't be that many. But I see a lot of lawyers who awaken. And by that, I mean a spiritual awakening where they start realizing I'm here for a reason. What is it? I want to bring all of myself to what I do. I want to make the world a better place by my having been here. So that's what I refer to by awakening. It's a level of consciousness and awareness beyond one's own immediate self-interest. And I see a lot of them then do a coaching course because there's this yearning to bring in the right side of the brain and this deep empathy, because people have been drawn to law. They want to help people, and then find it's very difficult to do so because you've got this very tight box within which you're working. So a lot of these lawyers do coaching courses and things on the side. And then, to my sadness, a lot of them leave the law because they're like, I just can't do this anymore. So I can't criticize. So if you are a lawyer coach out there listening to it, I am no longer practicing law. So I'm certainly not going to stand in judgment of your path. But my sense is that I want to help people find ways to still be all of who they are, but stay within the law and stay practicing law. So that's why I say now that I help lawyers who love the law, but are disillusioned and disheartened by the way it's practiced, to reimagine and redesign their lives so that they can practice law in their own way and in their own time and on their own terms.
Well, I can speak to how difficult that journey is, because that was precisely my journey. So I had my spiritual awakening at the very start of it, probably about 12 or 13 years ago, when I started to realize that there was more to this reality than I was seeing. And it was an exploration on the side of my career, and it grew and it grew and it grew until it had to be integrated into what I was doing for most of my waking hours, which was working as a corporate lawyer.
Because otherwise you completely split. There's the sense that, yes, you are
it's so damaging. And I've spoken to many people who've experienced that split. It is psychologically extremely damaging, and it leads to the mental health problems that we see, right? We
can do it in our 20s, interestingly. So in that stage, when we are trying on different identities, it's possible for us to do that, because you are trying to figure out who you are. And so, I mean, I remember dyeing my hair different colors, and I had different boyfriends. And so I'd be like a surfer chick one week and, something else the next month. And we can do that in our 20s, but in our 30s, and then particularly when you've moved into your 40s, if there isn't this integration, you get the fragmentation of the psyche.
Yeah, it can't be repressed any longer. It has to surface. So I actually had the dilemma. I've had these thoughts twice at least of whether to remain being a lawyer or not. The first time I came back to the law because I realized that I enjoyed helping people achieve their goals in a legal sense. And then the second time I came back was because I realized that there was a part of me that deeply held in esteem the values of law, the values of order, rule of law. And so it actually felt like, and I aligned with my identity to call myself a lawyer and to continue to work as a lawyer. But I see that need for people to really make up their minds as to whether they're going to be an ex-lawyer or a practicing lawyer. And I share the same feeling of sadness that we don't hang on to more people to continue practice, find a way to practice law after.
They awaken and they leave. And
Yeah.
we need to have awakened lawyers and awakening lawyers within the profession. And that's why I'm doing a lot of work with students now by showing them a different way early on and saying, you have a choice. Now, there are going to be a number of students for whom this doesn't resonate at all, because we are all operating at very different levels of consciousness in society. And that's, how it is. But a lot of us only discovered that there was this different way down the line, and particularly after burnout, adrenal fatigue, and depression and divorce and like substance abuse issues. And so I'm saying to these students, look, we can't you can't sidestep or live somebody else's life for them. You know what I mean? You can't just say, like we would to our children, like, don't do all the bad stuff because I'm going to keep you safe and help you come out the other end unscarred. It is part of the human journey, that we go through our own paths and we get wounded and we learn from it. But I am saying to these students, I just want you to know now that there is this other way. And here are all these amazing soul-led lawyers doing extraordinary work. And if you are interested, you can go down that path. And that's all it is. It's not, you're not forced, you're not shoved. You may think, well, this sounds, too esoteric, or I don't know, maybe somebody wants to, they've seen Suits and they want to be a cutthroat litigator, and that's absolutely fine. But you need to know that there are these different options open to you, and then you are making an informed decision. Because right now, the students are not making informed decisions because the law schools still focus in this antiquated model where success is seen as either I'm going to go like the human rights law route and not make much money. This is the perception. I'm good, like there's that option. Or there is the like academic route in which I'll just be cloistered, and like in a bubble, largely writing papers and talking to my colleagues and whatever. Or I'm going to go to try and get articles, we call it, intern in a big firm.
Yeah.
And like that is seen as that's what success is. And I think the world has opened up so much, and there are lawyers doing stuff people never dreamed of. And that's terribly innovative. I mean, Jacqueline Harani, who's one of the mentors in the program, was just telling me about a sliding scale fee model design app thing that she's doing for lawyers. And there's a lot of also apps being developed for better access to justice in terms of like using your phone. And and now that all the court cases are suddenly being held virtually, like there's another whole world opening up, and mediations being done virtually. So there's this whole world of cool stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel like my job is to say to the students, here, I just want you to know what's out there. And so far, again, the reaction that I'm getting, we're in early days in this mentorship program, but the comments from the students, I've recorded a video, which is 40 minutes, and it's an introduction to integrative law. And I'm looking at the comments and they're going, oh my God, thank you. Thank you. I had no idea. And one student just wrote, this seems like the opposite of what we're being taught in law school.
But you're equipping them for that new paradigm that is going to have to emerge out of all of the systems that are breaking down that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Because it's going to happen. I mean, there's just too much of the old that is unsustainable for many reasons. Climate change is just one, but also you're talking about the financial system, government systems, it can't hold. So the lawyers that are going to emerge out of it into the new paradigm, which is why I call this podcast a New Earth Lawyer. What skills are they going to have? And you are actually one of the important guides along that way, which really brings me to another question I had, which was, when you were talking about the systems breakdown, it occurred to me that if one had a very materialistic view of the world, and by this I mean non-spiritual view of the world, looking at these systems breaking down can be very angst-inducing, can be very worrying, can drive one to the brink of despair. But I found with a spiritual perspective, there's actually hope, more than hope. There's a belief that we will make our way through to something better. Do you accord with that? How does your spiritual experience lead you through this destruction of the systems?
So I work with various trainings, and one of them is developed along the lines, there's a program called Create Your Destiny, but I'm seeing more and more people, it's the same thing. There's a wonderful word for that I meant to look up. When the same idea is being generated in loads of different places at the same time. It's like an idea whose time has come.
Yeah, the 100th monkey effect sort of thing.
There's a term for this, and I can't remember what it is. There's this great word for, like with fashion designers all coming up with the same thing at the same time, but in different parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So this idea, and one of the premises is that our focus creates our reality.
Yeah.
And so hundreds of teachers now. I look at Martha Beck and Joe Dispenza, and I'm always Vitali. I'm always an Eckhart Tolle. I'm absorbing like a lot of these things, and I'm bringing a lot of these teachings to lawyers. So this thing that your focus creates your reality. So if your focus is on the material world only, then it feels like any disruption of that is quite terrifying. Whereas when you start to see things in systemic, much larger terms, I have this deep and abiding faith that we are being held, mm-hmm. and that everything is unfolding perfectly, although it feels so tumultuous. And a lot of what I do now is based on focusing on what it is I want to see. So right now, I don't watch television barely at all. I do watch some Netflix series, I'll be honest, but I don't watch news unless there's something massive or like, my mother has it on or something. So occasionally I barely listen to the news in the car, and I choose to surround myself with really uplifting and positive things about changing the world. And my energy is devoted to my family, to my community, to people whose lives I am looking after and trying to affect, and then bringing about this change with the students and these lawyers. And I find that is enough. And that the more stuff I bring in of negative influences, because the news is very one-sided. It's always the bad stories. You don't hear the good stories. And I've just found that it makes me feel overwhelmed and helpless when I buy into really positive and uplifting things. I often start the day walking my dog, take the child to school, walk the dog, and I listen to audios about all the change we want to see in the world and how to do that and how to be the fullest expression of yourself. And I must say, by the time I've done that walk and breathed in, I often walk on the mountain, I've breathed in fresh air and I filled myself with positivity. By the time I get to my desk, Geraldine, I'm on fire. Yeah. And that's what I'm teaching my clients to do. I sit down literally and I'm so filled with ideas and inspiration that I just want to be in the world. I want more hours to work because I love what I do. And it is possible to be like that. But we weren't shown that. We were shown that work is hard and it's hustle and there are all these things you need to do. And so a lot of the coaching I'm doing now, I'll backtrack a moment. I call it soul coaching because I realized that the type of coaching often, especially that's available in law firms, is executive coaching. And as one client who's working with me now, she said, at the end of the day, the coaching was about how I could make more money for the firm because they were paying my coach.
Or to put you into a certain box. If you're starting to wander off, and not fitting the box anymore, we're going to give you the coaching to fix you so you can get back into the box and perform.
So initially, just in the last couple of years, when I put the word soul coach on LinkedIn or whatever, and I thought, oh, it's going to sound flaky, that's my own judgment from having grown up in the legal fraternity. And then I realized, but if someone thinks that's flaky, they're not my customers. You know what I mean? If they're not working with soul, I have no interest, that sounds, they're just not, they're not my clients. And so
that's it. There's no resonance.
It's totally cool.
Yeah.
And recently, I wrote something about racism and how the weird thing that racism, the word like racism and racist has become almost being called that is worse than whatever it is you've done. Like the focus has been, because the word is so loaded now, that whatever the person has done seems to be secondary to the fact you've called me a racist, which completely flips the whole thing on its head. And so I wrote a thing about that. And then I realized some of my subscribers, might unsubscribe. And then I thought, well, good. If this upsets them, these are not my people. And that's cool. Please leave. If what I'm writing about is long-winded or too esoteric, or I'm talking about uncomfortable things, then by all means, you're free to go your own way. So more and more, and I think this happens in your 40s, that you step into your own power and you realize, like, this is who I am, and you don't have to like me. It's not as important to me anymore. I mean, I'm not saying I'm that thick-skinned that I can handle it all, but I'm less and less concerned. So I say that I'm a soul coach because I'm interested very specifically in what it is you came here to do. How not to get hung up on that if it's not clear at the moment, because maybe we can figure out what you can do for now. It doesn't have to be like this is the ultimate thing, because I think there is quite a thing about your purpose at the moment and people feeling like, oh my God, if it's not clear, then I'm just wasting my time. And actually it's all building, and sometimes we're not ready to know.
Perfect. Yes, I couldn't agree more. The journey is finding out, right? And it's not like there's you got to get up to the top of the mountain, which as lawyers and professionals we're trained to do. It's on the way to what you perceive as being the top. You might actually find there's another path off that you feel compelled to take, and you wouldn't have seen that path if you hadn't set off on the journey in the first place. But it's leading off in a completely different direction. And you might end up feeling like that's your purpose, but even then it might just be for a little while longer, and something else will pop up. And as you let it unfold, it just does so perfectly. So I think it's a beautiful thing that you're doing.
Those 2 years that I spent running a non-profit college for students, that was when I'd run away from the law. So some background so for 2 years I was running this college for students kind of from townships, and it had nothing to do with law really, but it was deeply soul fulfilling, and it has played a vital role in who I am and how I see the world. So I see it as absolutely necessary, although at the time it felt a little bit like, I just became a lawyer and now I'm often the middle of nowhere running this thing for students. What that was about. But only later in life, it all adds up. That was a very necessary piece. And it made me realize because I woke up there feeling I am doing what I'm meant to be doing. I had a deep sense of rightness in my soul and of being of service to people who needed me. And I thought, I want to bring back the law piece at some time, but I want this feeling to be with it. And so it was absolutely necessary.
How would you work with somebody as you are working with them to discern purpose? Is it that you're going in talking about their stories, their experiences, their feelings? How does it work, and how long does it often take?
So there are two primary ways that I do that. The one is that I believe that the universe speaks through us all the time and that we are all guided, but we are raised in a particular civilization, the modern Western world I'm kind of talking about, where we're not taught how to access this extraordinary greatness within us and around us and the non-physical beings that I believe we each have. So I believe that we're all guided. And there are some keys to learning to tap into that. And the biggest problem is that we fill our minds and that we are constantly busy. And so there's literally no space in our minds to receive that guidance about what it is we're here to do, or even what the next right thing is, to say or whatever, like literally moment by moment. So some of this reprogramming, because I've realized that all of my work is about reprogramming. And I now believe that the modern world is kind of like a cult. So we are being raised in this cult where there are all these erroneous beliefs that we've been programmed with. So like God is a white male being up there somewhere. We are all separate from each other. We need to struggle. We must look a certain way, surgery, Botox, whatever, like this is the right way to look. We need to consume all the time, whether it's a new phone or anti-wrinkle cream. We believe that life is happening to us and we kind of the victim of our circumstances rather than we're creating it. It's okay to eat tortured animals because like everybody's doing it. We may as well buy more plastic because like the planet's pretty screwed. So on and on and on. Okay. Children must go to school. And if they can't sit still for long enough, they must be medicated until they can. So on and on. We've been programmed with this crazy stuff. And our job here as awakening people is to question all of those beliefs and start figuring out what is true for us or not. And the same thing's true in the legal profession. So we've been programmed to believe that there's always such a thing as certainty and truth. And this does people's heads in when a lot of it is actually really gray. We've been programmed, you must discard emotions because they do not help us in finding truth. So we must disregard our own emotions and those of our clients. The power of our intellects matters over all else, including our all the other skills that we bring to the world. We must measure our worth by the number of hours that we can put in. There are winners and losers, so on and on. And so I help people deprogram.
Yeah.
So creating space in your life and in your spaciousness, literally like in your being, is one of the key parts. And it's scary because often we've been filling every moment so that we don't feel. So there is a healing process that starts, and I've channeled a message, so we'll have to talk about channeling just now, for lawyers specifically on a course that I ran last year. And I feel like I want to share that with everybody, really, because the key parts of that message, I'll maybe give you a link to it, are slowing down to be able to hear the guidance that is coming through you. But the reason most people can't slow down is because they have not befriended themselves. They are not comfortable in the silence. And so there's this step first that about befriending yourself and being okay in the stillness and silence, then the slowing down so that you can hear, and only then you will know the aligned actions to take.
Yeah.
So that's one way that I work with people about this slowing down. In my own life, I've learned that overwhelm is a habit. And if anybody had said that to me, I would have been very defensive about that. But it's only coming to that realization myself that that I'm able to sit with that. On this weekend in particular, it occurred to me that I need to talk about privilege when I say overwhelm is a habit, because I look at the circumstances that some people live in, and I realize that it's my privilege that's allowing me to say overwhelm is a habit, and that a lot of people are facing so much systemic inequity and poverty and systems where the amount of people who are depending on them is more than any human should be expected to cope with. And so I feel like I just need to add that caveat. When I say overwhelm is a habit, I still believe that we can determine what we do with our minds. And I love looking at great leaders like Mandela, who said, you can imprison me, but you can't imprison my mind.
Yes.
And so I try and help people see that you always have a choice where whatever your circumstances are, there is still freedom. Viktor Frankl talks about this as well, like in a concentration camp, but you still have the freedom of the mind. So to help people start to make these shifts and make more space in their mind and in their lives and in their energy fields to start finding their way. And some of that involves the trauma processing, because if you're stuck with all of the stuff that you just aren't prepared to feel, it means you can't slow down because it's terrifying. So then I would work with, is there trauma stuff that somebody needs to release, or is there a forgiveness, and how can you, and sometimes medication is necessary. Now, I'm not a doctor, but when someone's central nervous system is so burnt out, and this adrenal fatigue is a huge one, we're constantly on the go. Sometimes people who use medication in that period can start to have this experience of what it's like to live differently, and only having had that experience can you even begin to go, okay, this is something I want, and I now want to work towards maybe not needing medication to feel it. But it's like a rewiring of having a different experience of how it is. So medication and meditation, and I'd rather use meditation, but in some cases, I believe that medication certainly plays a role. So those are some avenues that I'll work with in coaching. And then the other one is doing spiritual readings for people. And that's the last part of the title that I use, is that I'm a spiritual channel.
Well, could you tell us about that? I really would like to hear about it. And I think people listening to this would like to hear about this. So please let us know what you do as a spiritual channel.
So it was in 2012 when I was on a trip to Bali. I had just launched the Center for Integrative Law, feeling very called to this work of, now I call it awakening lawyers. And I took a sort of 5-week break. I wasn't yet married. I went on my own, and I really just needed that space. I told people, I'm just pressing pause. Like it all feels like it's happening too much. I'm pressing pause. And I had a house in the rice fields near Ubud. It was quite out there. I realized I got there, was in the middle of nowhere. But while I was there, I became increasingly interested in this idea of spiritual guidance. I'd heard people talking about their guide said this or said that or told them to do X, Y, Z. And I thought, like, that sounds really useful. How do you get those? And I literally had no idea. I was not raised in a family where this sort of thing was happening. And through a series of extraordinary kind of circumstances, there was a local family who sort of adopted me and took me on pilgrimages around the island. And I was welcomed into their family and to their spiritual processes that they have there, these ceremonies all the time, which was really beautiful. And then the one day, like, things got faster and faster in terms of thinking about things and manifesting them. I'd been thinking about the spiritual guide thing. And then I had a coffee with someone that somebody else had told me you should meet while you're there. And it turned into this 2-hour extraordinary conversation with him talking about his spiritual guides, amongst other things. And a really powerful and beautiful conversation. And I remember sort of monsoon happened. And so we couldn't leave. We were in this cafe and, open sides, and this rain pouring down, and we just sat drinking coffee and smoothies and yogurt drinks as the rain belted down, and the roads were flooded up to about knee height. And when that happens in Bali, you just have to wait until it's all subsided eventually and run away into the ravines so that the roads are safe again. And I'd only just learned to drive one of those little
tuk-tuk things.
Scooters.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was like really nervous, and all the locals were so sweet. They'd like come and surround me because they could see I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was managing, but I would like go pat, pat, pat really slowly. And so I had this extraordinary encounter with this man who spoke about spiritual guides and how the first time, I mean, I didn't even bring the conversation up. And the first time he thought he was losing his mind. He thought maybe someone had spiked his drink. And it was only 2 years later that his guide spoke to him again and said, we thought that you were ready for our communication, and we apologize that it had, that you were so terrified. We thought that you were ready. And so straight after that, literally that evening, the local family that adopted me while I was there said, we're going to a Balian, who's a local shaman's house. Do you want to come? And so I said fabulous, and they told me what to wear, and they'd got me the right clothes because it's very important, the length of the sleeves, all those things. And then while I was in this temple with this woman, she said, do you want to pray with me? And I said, well, yes, when you she said, do you want to meditate in my temple? And of course, not knowing anything about what's going on, I'm like, yes, okay, thank you. So I sit down, I start meditating, and then I had this weird experience of my hands starting to move, which was a little bit disturbing. Anyway, so fast forward, I just knew something was kind of moving through me. I don't know, it was unnerving. But when I got home after that Bali trip, shortly thereafter, every time I meditated, my hands would start to move. Like I could feel them and eventually I realized they were showing me things. Yeah. And I thought I was losing my mind. I had some sessions with my psychiatrist. I was like, I just feel that my hands are showing me something and that it's good. Like, I don't need to worry about this. And she said, well, we might need to just do a brain scan just to make sure that these aren't impulses related to, like an ECG thing to see like why your hands are jumping and da, 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 da. I said, no, I don't think I need that. Anyway, it took me from that point about 2 years to start receiving the messages clearly, which I now just hear in my mind. And so so that's now 2014-ish. And then I just started receiving these extraordinary messages about what you're here to do, to work with awakening lawyers. This is how. It is not your job to awaken them. This happens of their own accord. Your job is to support them. And now finally, I do readings for clients. And we ask whatever the client wants to know. So why am I here? What is my work in the world? Is there stuff I need to heal, forgive? Yeah. And sometimes the answers are very unexpected. Things are brought up about some part of a person's past which we weren't expected. So when clients are ready, I do the soul channel work, and otherwise we do the opening up so that you can receive your own guidance, because I believe that we all have this ability. Absolutely. We're just not trained. We're not trained in it. And I've realized now we are the strange ones. It's not weird to have spiritual guides. Like, that used to be my view, that those are the slightly hippie, weird people who are into that sort of stuff, new agey.
New Ages,
And
yes.
now I look at every Indigenous society everywhere, Geraldine, and everybody's in touch with the spiritual world. And we are the ones who are weirdly cut off from anything except like ourselves. We've made ourselves the center of the universe.
It's a natural communication with just aspects of ourselves, or because we're all connected to the whole. So there are aspects of ourselves who are probably wishing that they could communicate with us, but all it takes is for us to ask, as you did when you went to Bali. You just said, I think this sounds amazing. I wish I could make contact with these guides.
Yes.
And that was you asking. So I had an experience where I went to Peru and I did ayahuasca. And in the middle of a ceremony, I received guidance and I was told, we were just waiting for you to come to Peru and to do an ayahuasca ceremony because you needed to get all of that stuff out of the way so that you could listen to us. And so I think what you're doing by bringing this in, and thank you for sharing this with us, is a gift that really the time has come. So thank you, Amanda. I am going to actually finish up on this note because we're getting to time, but sharing that I think was really necessary. It was a necessary part of having this podcast for you to share that with the listeners, the viewers, so that they understand the work that you are here to do for all of us. Thank you.
And my guides have said recently, which helps. I went back over something I channeled, that I'm particularly good at holding group energy. So I'm starting to work more and more with groups like the mentorship group. And now I'm developing a container for lawyers who are transforming their practice energetically. So wanting to live in greater alignment and do work that aligns with who they really are. So I'm creating a mentorship container, which will be kind of a 6 month to a year container to support lawyers who are transforming. I'm very excited about that program.
Sacred work. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know we could talk all day. It's been a pleasure.
We'll have you on again. That's for sure. Okay.